All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Looks like we have quite a few people who have joined us. Thank you, welcome. Welcome to today's webinar on legal and HR considerations for returning to work. And we know many of us, if you can, have been working from home, and today's conversation will be about what the future will look like and how to consider coming back to your office or your place of work. I'm Meredith Sadler. I'm the program director at the CBCA, who is hosting today's webinar. CBCA is the Colorado Business Committee for the Arts. We're a nonprofit based in Denver, and our mission is all about connecting arts and business. And we have some wonderful partners from the Employers Council with us today to share some terrific information in light of the pandemic and all the stay-at-home orders, and thinking about what the future of our workplaces are going to be. This presentation is done under a program at CBCA called Advancing Creative. That's where we host a lot of our professional development and business skills and education for artists and cultural organizations and creative businesses. We also have Colorado Attorneys for the Arts, which is specifically legal education for artists and creatives and cultural organizations. So that's the umbrella that this presentation is coming under. And we just wanted to give a special shout out to the Kenneth King Foundation, who is our funder for Advancing Creative. So thank you to Kenneth King, whose generous support has enabled us to really pivot our programming to provide over a dozen virtual webinars in the last 2 months, which we're really excited about. Today's presentation will be done through the Zoom webinar platform. So for those of you that are watching live at home, you are muted, you have your camera off, but we still want to hear from you. And there are lots of ways that you can still engage, participate, ask questions, share thoughts and comments. The best ways to do that are through the Q&A feature or the chat feature on your Zoom platform. When you chat, you can chat to just us panelists. You can chat to everybody if you have some thoughts or questions to share. But there's that feature, and then there's also the Q&A feature. And I would really recommend you use the Q&A feature to share your questions. That's what it's there for. We can help, that'll help us keep track of those questions and let us know if we're gonna answer them live, or we can text you a response. I'm joined behind the scenes by Rachel Henney from CBCA staff. Rachel and I will be closely monitoring the chat and the Q&A feature. So our wonderful presenters, James and Melanie, will be able to just focus on the presentation and get through this great content. And we'll be keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A throughout. So don't be shy if you have clarifying questions, if you need something repeated. We'll either politely interrupt and get those questions answered real time, or if they're longer questions, we may save them to the end, and there's a good chunk of time at the end for Q&A. And the other piece of housekeeping is that we are recording today's webinar. The recording will be posted afterward on CBCA's YouTube channel and on our Advancing Creative webpage. So if you want to go back and hear some of this content again, if you found it super helpful and you want to share it with friends and colleagues, we highly encourage you to do so and are making that available. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our partners at Employers Council. We are joined today by Melanie Daly, who's an attorney, and James McDonough, who's an HR consultant at Employers Council. And they're a wonderful partner, a longtime member and sponsor with CBCA. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to James and Melanie, and as they give their intros, I'm going to switch the presentations that you see, and I'll pull up their slides. Take it away, James and Melanie.
Good morning. My name is Melanie Daly, and like Meredith said, I'm an attorney at Employers Council. I do want to acknowledge, I don't know, I'm not sure what you can see behind me, but I am working remotely, and I discovered that the Wi-Fi that I have in my remote workplace wasn't up to snuff. So I'm actually using Wi-Fi from a local business. I live in the mountains, and because no one can go in the business, I am doing this from my car. So this is a first time for me, and possibly the first time that you've ever seen anyone give a presentation from their car. So unusual times calls for unusual measures. All right, so we're going to be talking about back to work and the legal issues that are inherent in that. And I'm calling my presentation Back to the Future, because after this pause that we've taken for the past couple of months, it's likely that we're going to see a reformation of sorts in the workplace. So I'm going to address some of the legal issues that are inherent in the return to the workplace and what happens when our employees refuse to work. But to do so, I want to begin by providing some context. When we consider the way in which the workplace has evolved, we see that the workplace transforms in reaction to what is happening culturally. So, for example, as millennials entered the workforce, many office spaces were transformed to accommodate the millennial mindset, which was geared and tended toward teamwork and collaboration. Now, considering this pandemic and the threat of a second wave of the virus, employers have to reconsider its workplace and its workplace or workforce planning in order to ensure worker safety. This return to work will likely set the tone for the workplace of the future, which will likely include better and more emphasis on ventilation, staggered shifts, the continued use of remote workers, and different means of configuring the physical space in order to allow for social distancing and in order to keep people safe in the most apparent ways. And you've seen that through glass partitions, for example, at the grocery stores. So with this as our basis for our understanding, let's turn to our present circumstances. Advance the slide, please. I don't mean to take this lightly, but I'm using the acronym COVID to describe our thought process as we begin to bring our employees back to work. So as you can see from the slide, we have considerations in opening the office, virtually, perhaps, in person, maybe. It actually just depends. For those of us who have had some success in working remotely, chances are we will continue to do so, at least for the short run. At Employers Council, our staff is entirely working remotely. And in order to comply with a safer at home order that was announced by Governor Polis, we have transformed all of our classes into Zoom presentations similar to this. This has required us to be more resourceful and to use technology in ways that we hadn't necessarily done so much of in the past. But that's just Employers Council. Every workplace has to make similar decisions based on its unique set of circumstances. Remember that how and when a business plans to reopen will impact as well its reputation in the community. And so as we do so, as we begin to reopen, we need to be mindful that how we reopen will likely impact our image in the community. And we want to do so in a way that is going to enhance our reputation. Next slide. As we've noted, safer at home still requires that vulnerable individuals may not be required to return to work. Vulnerable individuals is defined in the stay-at-home order, the safer at home order rather. Non-critical businesses may allow only up to 50% of their employees to conduct in-person work. So by taking the following measures, businesses can reassure their employees that they are doing all they can to provide a safe workplace to return to. These measures include deputize a workplace coordinator that's charged with addressing COVID-related issues, maintain a 6-foot separation between employees, and discourage shared spaces, clean and disinfect all high-touch areas, post signage for employees and customers on what constitutes good hygiene, ensure proper ventilation, avoid gatherings of more than 10 people, implement symptom monitoring protocols such as daily temperature checks. This order also requires that employers encourage frequent hand washing, face breaks, and providing gear such as gloves and masks. Next slide. Based on what we've already seen, it's very likely that employees will refuse or at least hesitate when recalled to work. In this slide, we see some of the federal agencies that play a role in employee safety, even in the best of times. The EEOC, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, promulgated guidelines in reaction to previous pandemics back in 2009. So what they've done is they've largely relied on those guidance rules, and then they've enhanced them to specify information from this particular pandemic. As you know, the EEOC is the federal agency tasked with overseeing matters related to discrimination in the United States. The present guidelines have shifted somewhat given the unique circumstances brought about by the coronavirus. For example, previously, performing a temperature check on an employee was prohibited as a medical exam under the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, the EEOC guidelines have been updated to permit such temperature checks subject to confidentiality requirements. Accordingly, the Safer at Home guidelines permit temperature checks. However, it will be critical to establish protocols in order to ensure confidentiality as mandated by the EEOC. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, regulates workplace safety. On its website, OSHA makes the important point that workers who believe that their employer provides a safe and healthy workplace are more likely to report to work during and after a pandemic. Therefore, it's critical for employers to let their employees know exactly what changes have been made to the workplace in order to ensure safety. I recommend providing employees an opportunity to articulate their concerns so that employers are aware of the barriers that employees perceive in returning to the workplace in order to assuage their concerns by taking those necessary steps to be in compliance with the regulations and also best practices. If you go above and beyond what the industry standard is and apply a safety rule that's unique to your own workplace, this will provide employer ease with the knowledge that the employer takes their concerns seriously. The Department of Labor issued the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and the CARES Act in March in response to, obviously, to the coronavirus. The FFCRA and the CARES Act deal specifically with illnesses that occur in the workplace or which may have happened to our loved ones, people that we live with, and what to do in the event that our child's school or daycare closed. The CARES Act is really the act that oversees the PP money accordingly in order to enable you to continue to pay your employees for about 8 weeks in most cases. And then the CDC, obviously, we're hearing a lot about that agency, an agency that we may not have had a lot of awareness before this happened. but it's important that you check the CDC guidelines and its website from time to time to ensure that you are aligning yourself in your workplace with the guidelines set forth by the CDC. And you may notice that from time to time, the White House and the CDC are not necessarily aligned, but check with the CDC because they are promulgating what are the best practices and what guidelines are best for ensuring safety in your workplace. Next slide. At Employers Council, we are already seeing that employees are hesitant or even flat out refusing to return to work. There are employees who honestly believe that their employer has not done enough to ensure their safety. And when coupled with reports of a looming second wave of the virus, some employees are refusing to return to work. Now, about a week ago, the Denver Post reported that the Division of Unemployment has refused to allow continued unemployment benefits to some employees who are refusing to return to work. However, it has also allowed some benefits to continue where employees are demonstrating a clear connection between their refusal to return to work, their own health concerns, and some evidence that their employer is not following local guidelines. We also know that some of our employees, particularly those earning minimum wage, are seeing an increase in their wages due to the additional $600 per week that's provided under the CARES Act. Consequently, some employees prefer to continue to remain on unemployment as it's a rational choice to stay home, earn more, and avoid the possibility of getting sick by being around people in the workplace. Members of, again, we're talking about vulnerable populations under the Safer at Home Act or the Safer at Home regulations, and these will likely continue to collect, these individuals rather, are likely to continue to collect benefits, but others with a more tenuous rationale for not returning to work may see that their unemployment benefits may be discontinued. Employers also have the option of terminating an employee who refuses to work, and given the high level of unemployment, we may see some employers exercising this option. One thing that James and I will both be talking about here in a bit is a survey that Employers Council did this month, mostly with respect to employers in the Colorado, Wyoming, Arizona, and Utah area. And we had a good deal of response to those survey results. One of those survey results we'll talk about is return to work issues and what employers are doing in your area. And I think that's going to be important so that you'll get a good understanding of what best practices are. Next slide. So it's important for employers to be aware of their employees' concerns, including safety, job protection, wages, and other personal considerations as we make our way back to some semblance of normal life. Life as we knew it likely won't return for some time, so every decision we make about our work, our workplace, and our employees will likely have long-standing repercussions. As the workplace opens up, we are cognizant of the tenuous nature of work in this COVID world. If a second wave occurs, how are we going to respond? Are we preparing for that response even as we're bringing our workforce back? All of us are trying to balance our desire to return to normalcy, to provide the goods and services that we're known for, but at the same time recognizing that things could once again turn on a dime. And not least of all, bear in mind the personal aspect of all of this as we navigate through a world alongside a microscopic enemy. But with good planning and partnering with our employees through this unique and uncertain time, chances are we are going to survive just fine. So with that, I want to take a look at some slides that address the survey results that we have. And then I want to get a little bit of information from those of you who are willing to talk a little bit about your workplace and share a bit about yourselves and your organizations so that James and I can help answer some of your more specific questions. Advance the slide, please, Meredith. In this first slide, we see how employers in our region are preparing to return to work. And a good deal of the responses that we got were from businesses that are in Colorado, and more specifically in the Denver area. About 11% have indicated that they've done little or no formal planning or preparations, which is, that's something that we have to be very thoughtful of, because as we bring our employees back, the extent to which we do so is going to help guarantee our success once we do return. About 37% has said that formal planning and preparations are underway, but nothing has been finalized or documented. Now, there might be a little bit of lag in this. I think we got the survey results about a week ago, and as you all know, all of this is changing daily. So by this point, a week later, my guess is that more and more employers are not just in the planning process, but they're starting to bring employees back, and that it is in a more finalized stage. For 31%, formal planning and preparations have occurred. Plans and processes are currently being finalized. So those two middle statistics are about 68% of the results that most of the employers are undertaking right now. And about 20% said the formal planning and preparations have occurred. Plans and processes are now being implemented. So those employees are a little bit ahead of the curve, and they're ready to bring their employees back. Next slide. With respect to ongoing risk mitigation efforts, I wanted to address this as an attorney, because my sense is that while this is ongoing and we're living through it at present, we're going to see repercussions of COVID and COVID-related decisions that are going to impact the workplace, and the court system for years to come. So with respect to our first question, screening questionnaires checklist as employees and visitors enter your facility, that's about 36% of the Denver and Colorado employers have already done that, whereas 28% is indicative of the more general area, again, Wyoming, Arizona, Utah. About 42% of those who responded said that they are conducting temperature screening as employees and visitors enter the facility. And as I said a while ago, the EOC has said that that kind of temperature check is allowed right now, because a temperature is one indication that an individual may have the virus. About 48% have said that they're asking employees and visitors as they enter the facility if they have any symptoms. And of course, when we're doing that, we are asking everybody to be very honest and give us the information that that they're aware of, knowing that there are some folks out there who are asymptomatic. About 70% require the use of face masks by employees and visitors while they're at work. And I think that this is a really heartening statistic to see that 70% in the Denver area are asking for this. But remember, the Safer at Home order does mandate the use of masks. So I really do want to advise everybody to use them to the greatest degree possible in order to ensure safety. Remember that the masks are not necessarily protecting ourselves from others, rather the masks are protecting others from whatever we may be, whatever germs we may be eliciting into the atmosphere. And finally, 62% are requiring hand washing and have hand sanitizer that's available upon entering the facility. And once again, I think that that is something that is a low statistic, and we should all be truly encouraging hand washing. That's something that we learned at the very beginning of the virus. Next slide, please. And then this question is, will employees be required to return to work even if they feel uncomfortable doing so? About 36% are unsure, 9% are saying yes, and 50% are saying no. And we have to really focus in and address why an employee would feel uncomfortable about returning to work. Is it because we haven't done enough to reassure them of health or safety? Is it because they themselves are suffering from COVID, or they are caring for someone who is? Is it because their child's daycare or their school is closed? Or is there some other reason? So I think it's important that when we have an employee who says that they're not comfortable returning to work, that we have those personal one-on-one conversations to find out exactly what their reluctance is and see if we can help to assuage those fears or do more to ensure their safety and make them feel a little bit more comfortable as they return to work. So that's my part of the presentation. At this point, James and I were hoping that some of you would be willing to chat and share with us some of your stories and what kind of experiences you're having in your own workplace.
Technology. Okay, here on this slide, this survey data reveals how so many businesses have been able to allow their workforce to work remotely. And the question here is, will they continue to do that? So about 58% of respondents in Colorado did indicate that they'll continue to allow employees to work remotely. Now, for some of you, that may not be possible, and that's a real challenge for you to deal with and still keep your employees and your customers and yourselves safe. Next slide, please. Okay, and then we also asked our folks in our survey to describe their plans to resume operations. And as you can see, we have quite a spread here, but about 44% are indicating a phased return to work where only a certain portion of employees will return to the office. This is very similar to what Employers Council has instituted for our organization, for example. As Melanie mentioned, we do have our office staff working remotely from all sorts of places, including cars. And but certainly we also have a few folks coming into the office. So when you're thinking about how is this going to work for you, it'll largely depend upon your type of organization. And you know, it's so important to, when you're thinking about all this, really the bottom line is safety, right? The bottom line is, what can we all do to keep ourselves and our employees and our visitors, our customers, our clients, whatever you call them, to keep them safe as well, and take reasonable efforts. And so this resume operations question will definitely vary by employer. Next slide, please. And before I proceed with there, Meredith, do you have any, or Rachel, do you have any chat comments or Q&A that came in to share?
No, nothing in the Q&A. It looks like most of our organizations are nonprofits, so I've gotten some feedback there. For others, we'd love to hear what you're experiencing, what type of work environment you have, and what you're going through right now. So please send those through the chat.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so again, the survey was asking our folks, how are you going to manage work schedules and staffing? And again, 43% are continuing that remote work arrangement where it's possible. Some are going to implement remote work arrangements. Staggering shift times to limit employee contact, 23%. and staggering employee work schedules to limit interaction where there are not shift work at 47%. Staggering work shifts is a highly recommended practice. Honestly, only 47% really surprises me that is quite low. And now Melanie did say this is changing and these are early results for employers who are planning. But honestly, that is a recommendation to stagger your work schedules, to limit employee interaction. And if you're going to implement any sort of screening processes, that will facilitate that as well. Because if everyone shows up at the same time, logistically, that will be very, very difficult to conduct any sort of screening, and some other considerations. We'll get to that in a moment. But also staggering functions throughout the day, break times, meal periods, etc. Again, the reality is to improve or increase, the social distancing between your employees and enhance the ability to stay healthy. That's what it's all about. Let's see here, limit number of employees in the workplace to 50% or fewer. 57% responded thusly. That is the first phase of Safer at Home. Is Governor Polis's order does allow 50% to come back. So going above that, unless you're in a selected industry, it can be in violation of the stay-at-home order. So it's important to stay aware and informed as to the Safer at Home order and what limitations that places on workplaces. Next slide, please. Okay, and then we asked our members, what are your strategies to protect those vulnerable employees? Again, vulnerable employees are defined in the Safer at Home order as well as in CDC guidelines, and it includes those over, I believe, the age of 60, those with chronic health conditions, a whole wide array of chronic health conditions. So this could be very challenging for employers because, as Melanie mentioned, there are laws in place through EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, to not discriminate against individuals based upon their disabilities, and certainly based upon their age. You cannot discriminate based upon someone's age. And what that means is you can't treat them differently just because of that age or that condition. And so that has put employers in an awkward position around how to manage those employees who are a vulnerable population. And basically what you want to do is kind of apply your standards across the board, and then invite conversation with your employees. Invite employees, if they're concerned about their safety, to come to you individually and discuss that with you. And then you can evaluate what sort of reasonable accommodation is appropriate. So it's very important not to automatically assume that just because your employee is 65, that they don't want to come to work. That is not necessarily true. They may want to come to work, and they may be more than happy to do all that you ask of them for, wearing face masks and social distancing and all that. And so pay close attention to that, to not assume that they cannot come to work. So anyway, as you can see, there's a variety of strategies there that employers can implement in the workplace to protect vulnerable populations, including the remote work option, reasonable accommodations. And now we didn't ask them specifically what kinds of reasonable accommodations, but honestly, 64% is actually kind of low. Really, pretty much 100% of employers need to engage in a reasonable accommodation conversation with an employee who expresses concerns about their ability to do their job. So keep that in mind. It really is required of all employers, no matter what size, no matter what sector, whether you're nonprofit, for-profit, government, you need to engage in reasonable accommodation discussions if appropriate. Certainly good hygiene and hand washing, 78%, and practice social distancing right around 80%. So there's a variety of strategies, as Melanie outlined in the Safer at Home order. Next slide, please. On the issue of face masks, again, the Safer at Home, as well as City of Denver, does require some face masks in certain circumstances and urges it in all circumstances where it's safe. And this has become a real hot button issue with some individuals for a variety of reasons. The issue of face masks has become politicized, and in the workplace environment, an employer may require face masks. And if an employee objects, it's important to explore that objection with them and identify what's at the root of it. If it's because of some health condition that they have, perhaps they can't breathe properly, or there could even be some sort of anxiety disorder that causes that. There could be some religious reason. This is kind of a difficult situation. But if it's purely a political statement, I don't want to wear a face mask because I don't believe in it, that is not adequate. And we have had examples where employers have terminated employees who refuse to wear a face mask in the workplace environment. Of course, when it comes to your visitors, your customers, your clients coming into your workplace environment, it's your private property and you can set the rules. And so some employers are hesitant, however, to impose this on customers. And unfortunately, there has been violence in the news for where employers have asked their employees to enforce the face mask order with their customers, and the customers refuse. So it's really not, it's not a pretty scene. But certainly do be aware that as an employer, you basically can require face masks in the workplace environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is really dense with information, and it's kind of awful in that respect. So I'm not going to go over every single item on here, but it's included here so that you, as a takeaway, can refer to it and see all the different ways that employers can implement various PPE and hygiene actions in the workplace environment. These are all recommended by the CDC and local health officials when it comes to slowing the spread of COVID-19 in the workplace environment. And you can see that there's a wide range of results. Some employers are not doing some of these. Again, some of them are not mandated. They're just very good practice. So do keep in mind that, as Melanie mentioned with regards to OSHA, and all employers are required to take reasonable measures to provide a safe workplace environment. Again, no matter how small you are, whether you're a nonprofit or a small a creative organization or creative business, if you have employees, there is a duty to provide a reasonable, safe workplace environment. And so certainly asking folks to wash their hands, to have sanitizer when possible, to even wear face masks. These are reasonable measures in general for OSHA. And if you're a larger organization, then the expectations increase for you as a larger employer, because the assumption is that you have more resources that you can tap into to pay for those actions. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to kind of sum it up and thinking about practicalities of human resources. So whether you are an HR person or not, or maybe you're the owner, you're the director, maybe you wear many hats and HR is one of them, there are some practical considerations for you to be aware of when it comes to this whole thing of returning to work and helping your employees, your customers, yourself stay safe. So first of all, screening. If you're going to implement any sort of screening procedures, which are recommended, you do really need to plan in advance who's going to do it, how is it going to be done, when and where. And this can be challenging for many employers, depending upon the logistics, their workplace location, the configuration of your workplace, as well as staffing. If you are going to implement screening, it is recommended that the individual who conducts the screening should have enhanced PPE, personal protective equipment. In other words, they should have a mask, ideally even a face shield, wearing gloves, And if they're doing a temperature check, that they know how to do that temperature check properly, and that you're recording those results in a way that is going to protect the privacy of the individuals, and that data is to be treated as a medical record. So it is to be kept in a private, secure location. So there are a lot of logistics around screening that you need to contemplate in advance. I just recalled that on our website, employerscouncil.org, we have a coronavirus resource center that's open and available to the public. We have a tremendous amount of data, a tremendous number of resources that you can use freely. We've developed it all for the community to help our community through this, including the survey data. The entire survey results are there. So if you want to look at that and scrutinize it a little bit more, you're welcome to it. Just go to employerscouncil.org and look for the coronavirus resource banner, and you click on that and you can access all of that content, and free of charge. So it's very, very useful. So, and on there, we do talk about screening, for example. Face masks, again, are you going to require that in your workplace? Are you going to pay for it for your employees? If not, if you're going to require them to bring their own face mask, maybe think about having some expectations around the quality of it, what sort of graphics are permissible. So we've already heard of stories where employees have shown up to work with face masks that have inappropriate comments printed on them, or they're creepy looking, like, really scary looking faces, or, just weird stuff. So again, these are the things to think about when you're talking about face masks. Social distancing, how are you going to implement social distancing in your workplace environment? If you are a salon, that's going to be a real challenge. There's no way to social distance between the individual providing the service and the customer, but maybe between the customers, spacing out your workstations, things like that. If it's in an office environment, how can you social distance there? As well, in all other aspects of the workplace environment, in the break rooms, community spaces, meeting rooms, public entryways, etc. Social and bathrooms, restroom social distancing is a hot button issue. One idea I have there for you is to maybe put a flag on the outside of the door so that it says when it's red, it means don't come in, and when it's green, it means the coast is clear. So basically one person at a time can use the restroom. Just food for thought for you. Think about that. Of course, again, the hygiene, sanitizing of your workplace environment. Talk to your cleaning crews if you have an office. Talk to your cleaning crews about what kinds of procedures and enhanced cleaning sanitization standards can they provide to you. But also what's important is that you communicate and in essence train your employees to sanitize their own workstations before they start using them and after they use them, and especially if they're shared. So the greatest successes are where the organization and the employees work together to protect each other. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. I'm just looking at the time. We're at 10:47, so we got a few more minutes. Contact tracing. So if one of your employees shows up to work and they test positive, or they are showing symptoms, or they simply call in and say, I'm sick, I think I have COVID-19, the Safer at Home order does want you to do some contact tracing to identify where that employee was in the workplace environment, and to do your good faith effort to alert those individuals, that other people in the workplace environment, that they may have been exposed. And so keep that in mind. And one thing to be aware of is to protect the privacy of your employee. You don't want to tell other employees, hey, Joe got sick and he probably got you sick. You simply want to indicate that an employee may have COVID-19 or has COVID-19, and we want to let you know that on this date, this approximate time, in this location is where this individual was. So it's giving them a heads up that maybe they need to become or be tested, and be aware of potential symptoms that may be oncoming. So your record keeping practices throughout this, it is, as Melanie mentioned, there is a there's a big concern around litigation for employers when COVID-19, as it rolls forward into the rest of the year and into 2021. There's talk of a tidal wave of litigation and lawsuits against employers not taking not making good faith efforts, not complying with local health orders, and that it's possible that employees could file claims against their employers or customers or vendors. So it's so important. Our recommendation is that you take good records of what actions you're taking and that you keep those secure, you keep the access to them limited. If you're conducting any sort of health screening or temperature measurements, that you record that and keep that secure and with very limited access. Only those with a need to know should have access to that. And hang on to all of this for a good, honestly, probably 4 years, 3 to 4 years. So when you're thinking of your record keeping practices, amp up, increase your skills in that area. And the last thing there is privacy. It's very important to protect the privacy of your employees. So when you are gathering information from them about their personal health conditions or other disorders or disabilities, keep that information confidential. Try not to have those conversations, like when you're doing screening on the front end, try to keep that information, those conversations in a secure place that's away from the rest of your folks, your customers, your employees who may be waiting for screening. So protect the privacy of your individuals. And next slide, please. Last but not least, when you throw all of this together, your organization's culture is really what's at stake here. If you are operating from a foundation of trying to keep your employees, yourself, your customers safe, if you're valuing them, if you're encouraging them to communicate their concerns, their ideas, and their contributions, then you can actually end up being a stronger organization as a result. So this is a real test of your organizational culture. And if you, as leaders, if you're on the call today, I think you're a leader in your organization to one degree or another, and you can model, you can set the tone for the whole organization and how you respond, how you're going to survive and come through this successfully. So a part of that is staying aware, informed, and inviting conversation and having good communication, clarity. And if you need help with resources, again, go to the employerscouncil.org website. We have it there for you. We have great information, reliable information. And if you need further help, become a member and we can help you with legal services and HR and training and organizational development, all sorts of services. So I think that does it. I think we're on the last slide and we'll open it up for some Q&A.
Yeah, hi, this is Meredith's voice here. We have 3 or 4 questions, so just giving you a heads up so we can manage our time. We got some really good questions come in. One sort of quick one that came through, we've heard things about 50% of employees coming back, sort of managing that 50% occupancy. Is that actually a requirement or is that just a suggestion?
Oh, this is Melanie. Yeah, so that is in the governor's stay-at-home order. And with respect to whether or not it's a 50%, that is, it's not something that's going to be policed. I don't foresee anybody checking workplaces to make sure that they are at the 50%. But that's strongly suggested in terms of best practices and the best way to bring your employees back to work. At Employers Council, we're still working remotely, but if we wanted to, we could begin to come back at that 50% threshold.
Oh, next question.
All right. Next question. This is from an art service organization. So they host workshops and trainings and a big annual event. Their team has been working remotely, but they're concerned about partnering with venues for future events, as well as issues with their own insurance. So any advice about sort of working with other organizations in their facilities?
Yeah, I think it's important for employers to take good faith efforts to identify what their partner organizations or partnering entities, what they're doing to keep people protected. And then you need to do a risk analysis of that and say, I'm not comfortable with that. You're not doing enough. You're not meeting, you're not doing enough, in my opinion, and then maybe negotiate, and maybe they'll meet you, to a higher level standard. So that's my thought there. How about you, Melanie?
Yeah, I think that before you jump into partnering, you need to have a conversation that you probably never had before, and that is, what are you doing to keep my employees safe? What are you doing to keep our guests safe? And find out whether what part of our survey they are landing on. If they are not really planning and really not intending to encourage hand washing or wearing masks, doing temperature checks, things of that nature, then you may want to reconsider whether or not it's in the best interest of your organization to partner with that organization at this time. So I think it's good for you to know what you consider to be best practices, and you have the expectations that everyone that you're partnering with is going to at least meet those same expectations. And I think that by having that conversation, that the two organizations can come together to devise a method that is most able to protect the safety of all the participants. Because in the past, when we were negotiating how we would hold events, there were other things that were more at the forefront. But right now, it's all about safety. It's all about ensuring safety and ensuring that we are aligning with not just best practices, but what's set forth in the Safer at Home order. And so have those conversations long before the event so that you know exactly what's going to be in place on that day.
Great. Another question here. Is it the organization's responsibility to do and implement the contact tracing? Do we also have to let anyone outside the organization know of a positive result?
I'm not aware of any legislation at this point that's putting an affirmative obligation on employers to do contact tracing. So I would say at this point, no. However, I think that as a best practice, in the event that you learn that somebody in your organization who was in your building perhaps has been affected by the virus, that you would reach out to all stakeholders to let them know. We do know that there's legislation at the federal level right now that is the purpose of which is to limit liability in workplaces where there could be some higher standard that wasn't met. And James spoke to that. We'll see how that legislation goes forward. I am thinking that it's probably not going to pass because we have a lot of information in terms of civil tort liability. And the question is whether or not a workplace is meeting the best standards and whether or not they breach those standards and that breach causes harm to somebody else. So if contact tracing becomes something that is done in the normal course, then that's something that we're all going to want to adhere to. But in terms of there being a requirement for contact tracing, there isn't any at this point that I'm aware of. It just may be best practices to use the EEOC guidelines in terms of the pandemic and to reach out to individuals who may have had contact with somebody who came in contact or has the virus. Let them know that it happened, but to maintain confidentiality at the same time. And that's critical.
Yeah, thank you. Two more questions here. This one's sort of along the same lines. I know a lot of the groups that are on right now are smaller organizations. And what are some of the best practices or recommendations for groups that may have, a really small team? Are they hiring outside help? Some of this sounds like it could be a full-time job for a whole person to sort of manage some of these procedures, as well as a full-time job with expertise that your current staff may not have.
Well, you know, it really is what's reasonable for the employer. And so certainly a small organization with 5 employees cannot do what a, you know, Fortune 500 company can do. So it really is a question of what's reasonable, what can we do. Not doing anything is not acceptable. I would suggest that thinking that, oh, we're just too small, we're, you know, that isn't a legitimate excuse. So identify what is reasonable, look at the suggested practices, and figure out what works for you, what works best for your organization. And again, on the employerscouncil.org website, we do have like checklists and forms that you can use. You can print off and or customize them for your usage, and figure out what sort of screening techniques work best for you. Melanie, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that absolutely what James said is true. And in terms of what is reasonable, I think that once again, we refer to the safer at home order and all of those issues that I addressed earlier. And I know that sounds like that's really high level, but it isn't. It just means maybe appointing somebody. And in a small organization, that actually becomes easier. You have somebody, maybe it's the receptionist, maybe it's the office manager, who says, these are these are the steps that we're going to take to ensure safety. We want everybody to come in and immediately wash their hands. We want all visitors to wear a mask as they enter. You develop that, and I think that if you use the safer at home measures, then that's going to take you a long way towards advancing towards this idea of what's best practices. And in a small organization, that's even going to be easier to promulgate and oversee.
Thanks. I know we're just about at time, but if we can ask just one more question, if that's all right.
I apologize. I have to leave. I'll let Melanie finish up. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Take care.
So the last question is sort of related in terms of best practices about having outside visitors. So we've talked about sort of bringing back 50% of your staff, but if you have clients or customers or vendors that want to come into your workplace for a meeting, how to handle that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that we're going to have to address bringing outsiders into our building in a way that's very careful and very thoughtful about their health, but also the health and safety of our employees. And in that you will have posted immediately in the entranceway about what you're requiring for all visitors. I think that once you go into a meeting room, that you, once again, you try to have meetings with less than 10 people in order to maintain social distancing. And then you make a determination about wearing face masks at that point. I think that it's really good to have hand sanitizer that's available throughout the business so that people see it and use it. And as employees, you can monitor those best practices, and people will watch and they will mimic those. Target in California, where an employee asked a customer to put on a face mask, and the customer got very irate and ended up breaking the arm of the employee. So I don't want us to get into a position where, we're having fisticuffs with our customers. But I think especially in your workplaces, in the arts world, my intuition tells me that we've been doing this long enough that people are familiar and aware that what they're doing is safe for themselves, and it's a safe practice to ensure the safety of others around us. And we start by having that signage, and we practice those safe practices in front of others, and they typically are going to follow suit.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you all for just hanging out another couple minutes. We'll wrap things up. We really thank you to James and Melanie for sharing this really helpful information. I'll turn my video back on and properly say farewell. hope you all enjoyed this presentation and learned something. I know I did. We will be posting this recording on CBCA's YouTube page and on our Advancing Creatives website on the main CBCA webpage. That'll be up in the next few days, so keep an eye out for that. And CBCA is putting out you know, at least one, if not two webinars a week on a variety of different topics. So please make sure you're following us on our social media, checking our website, getting our emails. If there's a topic that you are interested in that we haven't covered yet, or you'd like to revisit or go deeper, just reach out. Let us know what you're looking for. We're here to help. And we wish you all the very best. Thank you for joining us today.